Hi, it's Ray Grant. It is Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. It is 8:30 a.m. Here in Pittsburgh, and I am going to continue with the Zodiac Killer walkthroughs today. I'm going to talk about the events in Presidio Heights. Paul Stine was a cab driver who was murdered by the Zodiac Killer on Saturday, October the 11th, 1969. He was shot at approximately 9:50 p.m., maybe 9:51 or 9:52 p.m. at the near the intersection, right by the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. The first thing I'm going to point out in talking about this is if you go on if you go on Zodiac Killer message boards, which I tell you not to do, do not click on a Zodiac Killer forum. Okay, it is basically the road to misinformation if you do that. Okay, but one of the myths about the Presidio Heights murder that has lived on, and once it's out there, you can't kill it. It just goes on and on and on. Is this idea that Paul Stine was driving his cab through the theater district that night, and he was flagged down by the Zodiac Killer while Paul Stine was on his way to a dispatch at 500 Ninth Avenue. Okay? Well, the problem with that myth is that the dispatch to 500 Ninth Avenue didn't come until 9:45 p.m. Okay? And we know that Paul Stine would have been killed at approximately 9:50, 9:51, 9:52 p.m. In Presidio Heights. And if you go on Google Maps right now and you check from almost any address in the theater district in San Francisco, let's say the St. Francis Hotel, which was the St. Francis Hotel is where the cab stand was that Paul Stine frequented. Okay, let's assume for a moment that he started from that point. Okay, and or Mason, you can use Mason Geary. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and you go on Google Maps and you have him going from the theater district to Washington Cherry. You will see that the trip, even right now, if I do it right now, and it's 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday, the Google Maps will give you a time for the trip of 11 or 12 minutes, depending on which route you take. And that night would have been going through the theater district. Paul Stine would have been driving through the theater district right around the time that the shows were letting out. So the early shows were letting out. Okay, so probably 15 minutes is more like a good time for the trip, not so much 11 or 12 minutes. But let's go with 11 or 12 minutes. The dispatch from the operator of the SFPD as a result of the phone call made by the Robbins teenagers at at Washington and Cherry Streets. That phone call slash dispatch would have been made at 9:58 p.m. Okay, and we know that the Zodiac Killer, after he shot Paul Stine in the head, even with we'll deal with the front seat back seat thing further along here, but let's even assume he was in the front seat and he shoots Paul Stine. He still has to turn Paul Stine over and cut off most of the back of his shirt, okay? And then wipe the wipe the cab down, get out of the cab, wipe parts of the outside of the cab down, and walk away by the time that the police operator I have an upper respiratory infection, which I should probably make a doctor's appointment about, but that's doesn't pertain to the Zodiac case. Anyway, um, regardless of how you do it, I've seen posters on Zodiac killer message boards say, well, if the call came at 9:58 p.m. and it takes whatever, let's say it takes 11 minutes to drive from the theater district to Washington Cherry, he could still make it because then it would have been like 9:47. He could have taken the dispatch in the theater district at 9:45. Okay, if you don't allow any time for his cutting off the back of his shirt and doing all the other stuff that he did, and the fact that the Robbins kids didn't immediately call in, they didn't notice that there was somebody inside the cab playing with the or wrestling with the cabbie until after the shooting had already taken place, and didn't immediately call the operator. Okay, that's the likelihood that Paul Stine was still in the theater district at 9:45 is it's a ridiculously tight fit. I don't know how he would have had to drive very quickly to get to the intersection, and everything would have happened like uh, in fast forward basically. I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened was he already had the Zodiac killer as a fare, was driving towards Presidio Heights, and at 9:45 p.m. he got the dispatch over the radio. In 1969, they didn't have computers and screens like they have like in Uber vehicles, where there isn't any verbal communication between the dispatch and the driver. It's all done electronically. In 1969, it would have been done verbally. Okay, so as a result of that, uh, we can assume that Paul Stine was listening to his taxi dispatcher while he was driving the Zodiac killer to Washington Cherry. Okay, what that means is the Paul Stine wasn't paying a lot of attention to what was happening in the back seat of his cab. So wouldn't that suggest that whoever the Zodiac killer was, and it could have been two people who got into his cab. Okay, remember, I'm dealing with, I've been talking about multiple people in Riverside and certainly on Lake Herman Road. What if two people got into the back seat of his cab? Would he be suspicious? Would he be worried at all about who's in the back seat of his cab? Well, his taking the dispatch at 9:45 means that Paul Stine's last thoughts, one of his last thoughts was, what's my next ride here? Oh, here's a ride that's going to be reasonably close to Presidio Heights at 509th Avenue. Let me take this dispatch. So he would have to use his mic or what have you to call the taxi dispatcher and say, yes, I will take the fare at 509th Avenue. Okay, so the most logical assumption that we can make is that Paul Stine picked up, or if he was in the taxi zone at the St. Francis Hotel, that the Zodiac killer or pair of Zodiac killers came up to the cab, got into the cab. He started on his way towards Washington Cherry Street, actually towards Washington and Maple, because that's what the trip book said. Then en route, he took the dispatch to 509th Avenue. That's the most likely scenario, and that's what we're talking about here. When I go back over, when I do a circumstantial reconstruction, I'm asking myself, what is the most likely thing to have happened? That's for example, that's how a circumstantial case is made in court. Okay, are you counting on some weird sort of thing to happen, or are you trying to figure out what's the most likely thing to have happened? So the most likely thing to have happened in the case of Presidio Heights is that the Zodiac killer or Zodiac killers were already in the back seat of Paul Stine's cab when he took the dispatch to 509th Avenue. And obviously couldn't show up for that because he was murdered circa 950, 951, 952. That seems like a reasonable timeline for what happened. If you assume, particularly if you assume that the killer was originally in the back seat, which I do assume, then you're talking about whatever 4 or 5 or 6 minutes for the Robbins kids to look out, notice that someone was in the front seat of the cab, to give the killer time to to cut off the delve through the victim's clothing and to pull off the and to pull off the cut off the most of the back of his shirt. So if we imagine now that we're the next question we should probably ask is where was the killer? Before we even get to that, okay. One of the reasons that I'm giving this lecture on YouTube and people are watching it is that when the original dispatch went out that night, the dispatcher said that the killer or the assailant was a BMA, was a black male adult. Okay, so people for the last what is it now? Yeah, okay, so it's 54 years now. People have said, oh, this was a terrible mistake that was made by SFPD, or it was a terrible, unfortunate accident that the the killer was identified as was described as being a black male adult and not as a white male adult. If he had been described as a white male adult, then the police on Jackson Street might have been able to stop the guy who was walking, that Donald Fook and Eric Zelms ran into. They might have been able to stop him in his tracks and eventually, catch the Zodiac killer. When I was writing my book, I presented a scenario whereby you could trigger the mistake that was made. Okay, and again, this I will gladly stipulate that this is speculation on my part. But what I'm saying is, it would have been possible for the Zodiac killers who looked ahead in their murders, such that, for example, they went into the library in Riverside and checked out books to give the impression that Sherry Bates was actually in the library that night, okay? So that they would look at their crimes and say, what can we do to get to the desired result here, okay? So one of the ways that they could protect whoever the suspect was, once he's walking away from the cab, and even if he isn't walking away from the cab, if you have a respectable citizen at the cab that night and police pull up, the respectable citizen can say, "Oh yeah, I saw that the cab driver was there, and I went over." Essentially, what Lindsay Robbins' son says that Lindsay Robbins did. I don't think he did, but I don't think he actually went up to the cab. But someone who is, as long as he didn't fit the initial description, might have been able to get away from that. Okay, so the way that you get around that is, let's say that you have two Zodiac killers getting into the cab in the theater district. When they get, as I said, I mentioned this in my book in 2015. They get to the theater district, or they're in the theater district, they're picked up, they ride to the original dispatch location, which is Washington and Maple. One of the Zodiac killers gets out of the back of the cab. The other Zodiac says, "Okay, I'm going just a block further here." He says that to the cab driver. So the original Zodiac gets one of the Zodiacs gets out of the cab. He then immediately walks up to a nearby public payphone and dials 911 or calls the police, whatever the police number was in 1969. And he says, there's a black man who just shot a cab driver here in Presidio Heights. And the police operator says, "Oh, okay, what's the location out there?" And the caller says, it's a black man, and he shot the cab driver, and he's about to walk away. I better go see where he's going. Wait a minute, sir. Come back. And then the Zodiac killer walks away from the second Zodiac killer walks away from the payphone. Meanwhile, the first Zodiac killer, the actual shooter, shoots Paul Stine, and he cuts off the back of his shirt, gets out of the cab, wipes part of it down, leaves his fingerprints, walks up Cherry Street, walks down Jackson Street, and because the police operator was given essentially what is a subliminal suggestion, okay, which is the original caller, without specifying where the murder took place, says, "A black man just shot a cabbie here in Presidio Heights. Let me go and see where he went." Okay, that way, if some Good Samaritan citizen who is at the crime scene, as the Robbins kids were, they call in and say, "Oh, a man just shot we think a man shot a cabbie or did something to a cabbie, and it's out, it's across the street from our house." And the police operator naturally thinks, "Oh, this is that black man who the previous caller said he was going to check on, and he shot the cab driver." So then the dispatcher says, "Be on the lookout for a black male adult." Okay. In other words, what I'm suggesting here is it was possible for the Zodiacs. I don't know that I don't have videotape of any of this. Okay. But it was possible for the Zodiac killers to protect the shooter. Certainly once he got away from the cab, once he was like a block away, to protect the shooter from being stopped and questioned, or from being, apprehended, simply by making what you might call a subliminal suggestion to the police operators, so that if somebody did call in and just say, "There was a cab shooting by a black man in Presidio Heights," okay, I'm going to run over there and see where he went. And then, 3 or 4 minutes later, the Robbins kids call in and say, "Yes, this took place at Washington and Cherry Street." And and as I said, that basically triggers these so-called mistake by the police operator, which may not have been a mistake, or at least the operator may have been set up to do that by the Zodiacs. All I'm suggesting here is that that's a possibility. In other words, the identification of the suspect as a black male adult may have been triggered by the Zodiac killers themselves. Okay, I'm suggesting that as a possibility. Let's go to the positioning of the killer inside the cab. Okay, again, You wonder sometimes where misinformation comes from. In the case of this idea that the killer was originally sitting in the front seat of Paul Stine's cab, where did that come from? Well, it came from Dave Toschi, and essentially the idea was that Toschi looks at the killing and he sees that the victim was shot in the upper. He was shot in the upper right side of his head. Okay, he was shot above and in front of his right ear. I don't know if you can. This is my right ear. I think it's on the left of the screen, but maybe I should do it this way. I don't know. Anyway, Dave Toschi basically said what anybody following the case should say, and it should be your immediate reaction. Why would any killer whose intent is to kill a taxi driver, why would he lean forward instead of just shooting the guy in the back of the head? And remember, the great Michael Butterfield, when he was initially on TV back in 1999, I believe it was on, maybe not, maybe it wasn't on Case Reopened, maybe it was on Mystery Quest. But Mike Butterfield said that Paul Stine had been shot in the back of the head. No, he knew better, but the point is, it is much more logical for somebody sitting in the back seat of a cab to shoot, if he's going to shoot the cab driver, to shoot him in the back of the head. Why would you lean forward? You would have to lean forward, take the gun, thrust the gun forward, against the person's head and shoot him that way. It doesn't, why go to that much trouble? And I'm guessing that's essentially what Dave Toschi said. And you have Zodiac hobbyists on message boards saying, well, they did like some sort of graph on a blackboard somewhere, and it said that he was shot that the killer was sitting in the front seat. Okay, well, supposedly, and this is hearsay on my part here, but supposedly, Paul Stine did not allow people to sit in the front seat of his cab. If you were getting into Paul Stine's cab, you were going to get into the back seat. Okay, but there's the other reason to believe that the shooter was in the back seat of the cab is that when the morgue stewards came and took Paul Stine's body out of the cab, and this is described in the Robert Graysmith's book, as they're pulling the body out of the cab, the Paul Stine's city map, the map of San Francisco, and there's a picture of it. You can go and look at Zodiac Killer message boards of the Presidio Heights shooting, and you will see a picture of the book lying in the street. Okay, and it's lying in the street because it's blood covered. And it's lying in the street because when the morgue stewards pulled Stine's body out of the cab, out of the front seat of the cab, the city map fell into the street. Okay, now here's a little bit of personal history. I flipped over on the Pittsburgh Parkway when I was a special delivery driver for the U.S. Postal Service on Sunday, March 24th, 1974. It happened sometime between 6:30 and 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening. And I flipped over, or no, was that Sunday? No, maybe it was Sunday. Okay, I'll have to. It was a weekend. And I think it was a Sunday. Anyway, back in 1974, there was no such thing as a shoulder strap in your car. When you put your seatbelt on, all it was a lap belt. So what ended up happening, my postal Jeep flipped over and my forehead came down and had, kind of like the horrible thing that happened to Sammy Davis Jr. basically happened to me. And it's one reason why they started putting shoulder belts in cars, because if you did hit something and you're wearing a seatbelt, all the seatbelt did was it strapped your lap to the seat, but your head could still move forward. And if you hit something, or were if your car was thrust forward at high speed, your head would do this. And I've had a scar for the last, whatever it's been, 49, almost 50 years now, 49 and a half years, that you can see. It really isn't visible unless you're like right up next to my head, and then you can see it. And what happened was the top of my head opened up, and I had exactly the configuration that Paul Stine had, which is I was sitting in my postal Jeep, and there wouldn't have been a seat next to me. There was this tray configuration, which was next to you as you were sitting in the car in the postal Jeep. And I had a city map, which I still have up in my attic. I can go up in my attic and bring it down and show it to you. It's the city map of Pittsburgh, and it has this giant blood stain on it from my head hitting the steering wheel. So it's basically the same idea. I'm just thrusting myself into the crime there. But it's basically the same idea that you had with Paul Stine, which is that if you're a driver, and when I was a specials driver, I was all, okay, this next special livery letter I have is for this address in this neighborhood, and you're looking up the address in the city map to find out where it is. Now, I just found out recently that I was driving. I've been driving on the Pittsburgh Parkway to visit one of my relatives, who is in a hospital in Moon Township here, and that necessitates you driving almost out to the airport here in Pittsburgh. The airport is about half an hour from where the downtown area is and where my own neighborhood is, which is in the eastern quadrant of the city. But the point I'm making here is that as I'm driving on the Parkway West, I am driving past the same areas that I drove past 50 years earlier. Okay, so and I hadn't been in the habit of doing that, and I'm saying to myself, wow, it's been almost 50 years since I was going by like some of these places. Essentially, what you're thinking about, if you're a postal driver, and I was 22 years old at the time, hadn't had my 23rd birthday yet, and I didn't know the city very well, so I used the city map. And Paul Stine basically was an academic. He was going for his PhD at San Francisco State University, and he was really, it was driving a cab was his profession, but it wasn't really his career. Okay, so he wasn't a career cab driver by any means, and didn't know every section of the city, so he had a city street map. So the city street map would have been on the passenger seat beside him. Okay, and even assuming that a passenger gets into the front seat of his car, is he going to leave the map there while the passenger just sits down on the map? No. If the Zodiac killer had gotten into the front seat of the cab, and Paul Stine had allowed that, then I would assume, again, this is circumstantial assumptions. It's what's done in courts every day of the year. I would assume, under normal circumstances, that the victim would have Paul Stine, as he saw the killer was about to sit down in the front seat, would have taken the street map, at the very least would have put it at the top of the dashboard, or maybe put it in the glove compartment. He wouldn't have allowed the killer to sit down on his street map. Okay, so this is, of course, assuming that this strange configuration where The victim gets shot in the right side of his head, and the killer is sitting in the passenger seat. And somehow, most of us are right handed. We have to assume the Zodiac killer was right handed from his actions elsewhere. I believe also in Lake Berryessa. But, I'll deal with that issue somewhere else. Anyway, even if it's his left hand, if he's shooting Paul Stine with his left hand, it's a problematical shot because the shot went into the right side of Paul Stine's head and was angled toward the front, okay? Wouldn't that suggest that he was in the back seat of the car, okay? So if the shooter is shooting Paul Stine with his left hand, that's problematical. If he's shooting him with his right hand, which is more likely, okay, it's very problematical because now you have the gun and he's doing one of these across his own body or turning and shooting, and you would expect the bullet to slant from front to back, but that's not what happened. The bullet went into Paul Stine's head and there was a slight slant toward the front. That is consistent with the killer sitting in the back seat of the cab. Now, the next question that you're going to ask, and I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell with this video and see if it works. It probably won't, but let's look at what the Zodiac killer was doing in mathematical terms and see if we can figure out. Let's do it this way. Okay. When I wrote my initial book on the Zodiac killer, which was in 1990, I talked about how the crimes were mathematical in nature and not so much astrological. You think of the word zodiac, you think of astrology, maybe you think of astronomy. Okay, so and what I said was that the crimes were much more numerical and mathematical than they were. They weren't astrological at all, and I don't think they were astronomical. Although we won't go into this, but there's a poster who does make some astronomical points on over on Reddit there. But let's stay away from that one for the time being. The Zodiac killer mentions radians in his in the July it's in the Little List letter of July 26, 1970. The Mount Diablo Code concerns radians and the number of inches from the radians or toward the radians, whatever he says. He mentions the word radians twice. A radian is a circle divided by 2 pi, okay? The most common constant in mathematics is pi, okay? It's 3.1415926. So there's also this configuration that Dave Aranchek shows in his video episode 9, where if you look at the solved version of Z340, it looks like this. There are two. Let's see if I can draw this. That's not too bad, okay? This is what the solution in the, let's see if we can see that. Okay, there are in episode 9 of Dave Aranchek's series, Let's Crack Zodiac, he points out that there are two whatever you want to call those backward L's sequences in the ciphertext. Okay, and the Zodiac killer had the choice of using different symbols for the L shapes, and he didn't. He used the same symbols, even though he there were multiple chances of there were, I think, four different possibilities he could have used for the plain text letter, and but he used the same one that he used down here. Okay, and in other words, the whoever constructed the Z340 cipher deliberately, um, cons- deliberately, apparently, deliberately constructed a configuration which was a mirror image. Okay, so that if you're looking at a killer who who um, who mentions radians twice in a letter, who sends bomb diagrams to the authorities, and who sends the 340 cipher, which uh, not only contained a transposed ciphertext, which would have been taught would have been contained in the Army code manuals, and to become a cryptographer for the Army Air Corps, let's say, back during World War II, you would have had to have been an educated person. They weren't using people with drool coming out of their mouths who couldn't spell common English words. Okay, so needless to say, the intent of the Zodiac killer when he misspelled words was apparently just to throw people off and to give the impression that he's this, yeah, and just barely do that. I mean, in a theatrical way, give this impression that the Zodiac killer is this nitwit who's going around, and can barely cross the street correctly, and and yet he's doing all these very sophisticated things. So let's take a look at the most common constant in mathematics. This was on the back cover of my book in 1990. And if you look at well, let's see if this is going to, this isn't working. Okay. If you look at the Exorcist letter, it has, let's redo this. I haven't practiced this live. Maybe I should have. Okay, SFPD. It looks like this. Me37 SFPD 0. Okay. Now, I've already talked in the me should be a little bit further over here. Anyway, I've already talked on some of these videos about how the significance of the number 37. The number 37 is the total number of times that the Zodiac killer struck in the four canonical crimes. He struck 10 times plus 9 times plus by gun, and what you get is this. You get let me see here. Okay. You get Lake Herman Road, 10 shots fired. Blue Rock Springs Park, 9 shots fired. Presidio Heights, 1 shot fired. At Lake Berryessa, you get 7 stab wounds to Brian Hartnell, 10 stab wounds to Cecilia Shepard. So that adds up to 17. The gun by gun, which is vertical component of the 340 of 20 rows is 20. The 17 columns, which is the horizontal component, by knife is horizontal on the car door, and that adds up to 37, okay? So Me-37 SFPD 0 isn't a victim count. It's just saying, you know what? I've struck 37 times and SFPD hasn't laid a glove on me so far, okay? But there's another way to interpret Me-37, okay? And I'm going to demonstrate that now. You know, I've been very critical of Mike Butterfield, but I do have to say one thing: he is a million times better at doing graphic work. I need to hire him, Mike. If you're watching, if you would like to make some like money on the side, you can contact me. Just it's Ray Grant period TZMS at gmail.com. Ray Grant period TZMS, that's the Zodiac murder solved, TZMS at gmail.com. And maybe I can use like some of your graphic stuff. Anyway, what if Me-37 also means something else? What if it means the whole number pi of pi with 926. In other words, Me-37 means the whole number 3 followed by 7 decimal digits of the fraction of pi. That's the whole number of pi, which is 3. And the first 7 decimal digits, 1415926. And obviously it goes on forever from there. The next 3 numbers I think are 535, okay? But if he's saying Me-37, he may be saying I am 3.1415926, okay? Okay, so let's hold that thought. And I'm going to wipe off my dry erase board, and then we're going to have some pie here, okay? Doesn't that sound good? I mean, you come to my video and, my explanations are easy as pie. All you have to do, this was on the back cover of my book in 1990, so a lot of you were either not born then or were like little kids when this went out over the didn't go out over the internet because there wasn't an internet. But what you do is you start with the whole number of pi, then you separate the numbers like this. And what you get is this. And this isn't rocket science. This is like very simple. You start out with this number, 3.1415926. Now you go to this sequence, which is 3, let's see where I am here. 3, 1, 4, 15, 9, 26. Let's read those as letters of the alphabet, shall we? The third letter is what? Third letter of the alphabet is C. First letter of the alphabet is A. The fourth letter of the alphabet, D. The 15th letter of the alphabet, that's O. The 9th letter of the alphabet is I. The 26th letter of the alphabet is Z. Okay? So here's what you end up with. Okay? You end up with this sequence of this sequence of letters. Cadoiz. And it's an anagram for your favorite serial killer, right? Could this Cadoiz? And as one of the posters on an early Zodiac message board, I think actually on Mike Butterfield's board, pointed out, there isn't a lot more that you can do with that sequence of letters if you're trying to turn them into, a recognizable sequence of letters. Basically, the most recognizable one you're going to come up with is that. And good luck, finding anything else that's going to be Try it this way, yeah. So for some of you, that's old hat. But I'm just in case, maybe I have some new viewers here, so they understand what I'm, or they're being flabbergasted for the first time. Okay. Anyway, the point being that the whole motivation behind naming himself Zodiac was to evoke the geometric constant pi. Okay, so that let's do this again. So that the people might understand that the idea behind the Zodiac murders was mathematical. It didn't have anything to do with killing people, didn't have anything to do, you can psychoanalyze the Zodiac killer until you're blue in the face. And mostly it's done by amateurs who are posting under fake names on the internet. Okay. And what that has to do with anything, I haven't figured out yet. Okay. But if you look at what the Zodiac killer actually did, and as I said, Dave Aranchek's solution to Z340, even though in my opinion it is not the actual intended, well, it was intended, but it's not what you're supposed to get from the Z340 grid. But the idea is that what they were doing was something mathematical. And if you look at what they were doing is they were trying to create a design on the map of the United States. And let's do this. And also Greater Boston. Okay. Vallejo. Okay. I'm one of the world's worst artists, by the way. So if you haven't, you probably figured that out by now. But just in case I'll let you know. It's basically this. Imagine that that's a map of the United States. And what the Zodiac killers were doing is they were creating a point here in Riverside, which was when they dropped the watch, which was stopped at 12:22, next to Sherry Bates's body. they were creating a point. When they did several murders in the San Francisco area, they were creating an angle. They were creating the radiant angle, which was based on Mount Diablo. When they abducted and murdered Donna Lass in South Lake, or actually in State Line, Nevada, but she lived in South Lake Tahoe. She basically lived on the border. She had Donna Lass was a victim who had her foot in two worlds for all intents and purposes. So one foot was in Nevada at where she worked at the Sahara Hotel. The other foot was in South Lake Tahoe, California. Okay, because she lived in a city that basically that had multiple zip codes, and one half was California, the other half was Nevada. And if you put a clock face to the Nevada-California border, what you will get is 1222. Okay, two quibbles with that. First of all, the hour hand wouldn't be pointed straight up. It would be 11 degrees to the right. The second is that the angle is actually 131 degrees, so it'd be more like 1221.50. But if you allow for those two quibbles, the venue for Donna Lass's murder can be said to evoke the clock time of 1222. And the same thing was going to happen in Greater Boston, which is they were creating the terminus triangle, which consisted of the angles 12, 22, and 146. Okay, and that was for the terminus event, which was scheduled for Friday, August the 11th, 1989, which was prevented from happening by myself and various security at in Greater Boston. Okay, but basically this was the idea. This was what they were trying to do, and the part of the idea of pi was, let me see if I can do this. They were fascinated by the idea of the California, Nevada. The reason Donna Lass was killed, or one of the reasons she was killed, is that you have this border between California and Nevada, which Donna Lass's life straddled, basically. The California-Nevada border is essentially a physical manifestation of the pi constant. It's California on this side, Nevada, California on this side, Nevada on this side. California begins with C, Nevada begins with N. C is the third letter of the alphabet. N is the 14th letter of the alphabet. So the border itself is a physical manifestation of the simplest form of the pi constant, which is 3.14, 3 border 1/4. Okay, but that was the idea. Anyway, I can do this all day, but I'm sure you would rather get back to the actual evidence in the case. So when we have we have here's the whole point of what I was trying. When I picked this thing up, this is the entire point of what I was trying to say here. If you make the assumption that the Zodiac killers were interested in creating a mathematical puzzle, okay, and a geometric puzzle, okay, as I've been trying to demonstrate here, and I'm not very good at it, okay, but if you make that assumption, then ask yourself this question. Of the 4 public events, of the canonical events, starting with Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs Park, Lake Berryessa, and Presidio Heights, what do you see? here's what you see. You see David, the first victim in Lake Herman, at Lake Herman Road, was David Faraday. The final victim in Presidio Heights was Paul Stine. Okay? Now here's the question. Why would someone who is sitting in the back of a cab reach forward and instead of just shooting the cab driver in the back of his head, why would he lean forward and creates all sorts of complications for himself? But he managed somehow to stick the gun against the side of Paul Stine's head and shoot him with the bullet going basically slanting towards forward. Okay, why did he do this? And here's why he did it. It's because David Faraday was the first person that the Zodiac killer murdered on Lake Herman Road was David Faraday. And David Faraday was shot on the left side of, it looks like the right side actually on here, but it's the left side of, David Faraday was shot in the left side of his head, okay? And that was somewhat problematical because the killer had to grab David Faraday, had to pull him up against the passenger side of the Rambler, and then shoot him in the lower earlobe on the left side of his head. Fires a shot that is slants toward the front of David's head. Fires the shot through David's head, although the bullet lodged in his head. And same thing with Paul Stine. Okay, so the first shot that he fires is shot into the left side of Paul Stine's head, of David Faraday's head. The last shot that he fires, the last time that he struck in the canonical murders, was done in the right side of Paul Stine's head. Okay, what is the reason for this? Well, the reason is to create a quantity. In other words, if you're doing a public presentation and my cat's making noise now over here. The idea is that you're creating a quantity essentially in space. Okay, so you have David Faraday and you have Paul Stine. So, and again, this looks backwards on the screen, but you can do this demonstration yourself. He shoots David Faraday in the left side of his head because that's the beginning of the quantity here. And the numbers are what I said they were before. It's like 10 plus 9 plus 17 plus 1. Okay? So essentially what they're doing, and then they shoot Paul Stine in the right side of his head to complete the quantity. If you're doing algebra and you're doing an equation, the idea is we're going to shoot David Faraday in the left side of his head, 10 shots, Lake Herman Road, 9 shots, Blue Rock Springs Park. Then here at Lake Berryessa, 17 stab wounds, 7 and 10. And then the 1 shot in Presidio Heights, and this completes the quantity. This completes the demonstration, okay, in effect. It's as if they're demonstrating an equation on a blackboard. And that's what the idea is. David Faraday and Paul Stine were effectively bookends. And that's why this weird shot that they take that the killer takes into the right side of Paul Stine's head, right side of his head, is done by the killer. It's to make that point that this is in figurative terms, this is a mathematical equation that they are starting with the shot in the left side of the head, quantity, and completing with a shot in now I'm like in the Marines now. This is like a boot camp in the Marines, and left, right, and my drill instructor is going to tell me, "Oh, we're going to have to drill like left and right on your hands and on your feet, so that you." I was never in the service, but my older brother was in the Air Force, and that's what he got in boot camp. Is they told him they were going to have tattoo left and right on his hands and on his feet. Okay, it's the same idea though. It's the quantity. David Faraday, left side of his head. The quantity begins here. Okay. The quantity begins here, from your vantage point, and it ends here. It begins with David Faraday. It ends with Paul Stine. So by shooting Paul Stine in the right side of his head, however, yeah, I'm not going to get this right anyway, but by shooting David Faraday in the left side of his head, the first shot fired by the Zodiac killers, they were beginning a sequence. They were beginning a quantity that ended with the shooter in the back of Paul Stine's cab firing into the right side of Paul Stine's head, even though it does not make sense to do that. Okay, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just shoot him in the back of his head? Okay, so let's move on here and into that. Here's the funny thing. After writing my book in 1990, which was primarily about the mathematics and about the conceptual art angle of the Zodiac killer case, whatever it was, I guess 25 years later, I write Zodiac Killer Solved, which, as Ned DeHaan has pointed out, the first 12 chapters are all about the evidence, and they don't really talk about my theory at all. And I don't get into the theory until the last 9 chapters of the book. But now I'm so evidence-oriented, I feel a little bit weird, like going into the mathematics again. It's like I'm going back in time now. It's like, it's the same feeling that Dave Aranchek said he got when he read the plain text for Z340, which is that he knew that it was written back in 1969, so it's kind of like you're opening up a time capsule. But anyway, the Zodiac killer has just shot Paul Stine, and we're sitting at the corner of Washington and Cherry Street. When the Zodiacs send the mail a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle on Monday, October 13th, 1969, the letter doesn't say that the murder took place at Washington and Cherry. It says over by Washington and Maple. Okay, what does this mean? Well, to know that the original trip book destination was Washington and Maple, that means the letter writer was in the car that night, or he was either in the car or he was like a co-conspirator of the person who was in the car. Okay, does this make sense? Okay, so that this whole thing that Thomas Horan has made like his hobby. He's the true Zodiac hobbyist. Has made his hobby this idea that the letter writer had. Well, it's what he thinks has changed down through the years, and it keeps changing, and I can't even keep track of what he thinks anymore. He doesn't believe any of it anyway, so in that sense, it doesn't matter. But whoever the Zodiac killer was, and the writer of the these Zodiac letters, they were associated. How do we know that? We know that because saying that the murder happened over by Washington and Maple puts the letter writer in the cab, or puts him, an associate of his, in the cab. In other words, whoever wrote the letters was directly associated with whoever did the killings. Okay, the murders were not a myth. Okay, so the other thing that means is that there was never any need on the part of the Zodiac killer to cut off Paul Stine's the back of Paul Stine's shirt. Why? Because saying that the murders took place over by Washington and Maple puts the letter writer in the cab. Only the letter writer would know, and police. Now, here's the thing. If you assume that every police department is corrupt and is capable of doing anything, then we're now in JFK conspiracy theory, where you have literally hundreds of conspirators. Now, somebody might come back and say, well, wait a minute, Ray, you're assuming that there were 4 conspirators, right? Yeah, well, 4 is a very small number. And I have 2 pairs of conspirators who were related to each other. A father and his son, Hugh Penn and Gareth Penn, and a mother and her son, Berta Margolis and Michael O'Hare. Okay, so it's a small group. A small group of conspirators can keep things quiet, in my opinion. If you're talking about literally hundreds of people who know something, probably even that, if you're talking about the CIA, or a government agency, the FBI, that's even probably possible. But there wouldn't have been any need for conspirators if the Zodiac case were a myth to keep quiet, because there's no wrongdoing involved. Even if it were against the law to write letters about unconnected homicides, there would be a statute of limitations. There's a statute of limitation. Look, the Golden State Killer couldn't be prosecuted for the East Area rapist crimes. Why? Because the statute of limitations had run out, and we're talking about rape. We're not talking about somebody like writing a bunch of letters of hoax letters. Okay, so the whole premise behind what he's saying doesn't make any sense. Okay, but let's continue with what the reason that I think the Zodiac killer got into the front of the cab, which is that he gets into the front of the cab and cuts off the back of Paul Stine's shirt to cover up his actual reason for getting into the front of the cab. He didn't get into the front of the cab to cut off the driver's shirt because he didn't need to do that. The fact that he knew that the trip destination was Washington and Maple is enough. It puts him in the cab. It puts the letter writer in the cab. So why get into the front seat of the cab? He gets into the front seat of the cab to do something else. And by cutting off the back of his shirt, it covers up what the actual intent was. Let me see if I can draw this. These are not accurate. This is why I need Mike Butterfield to do some of this stuff for me. All right, let's do this. The ultimate intent of the Zodiac project was to create a triangle in Greater Boston, and the triangle consisted of 3 points. One was the MIT Tower. One was the location of Joan Webster's body, which was at BM 12. In Chinatown in Boston. It was the corner of Neeland and I-93, and the 146 was the Liberty Mutual building. You can read about all of this in my book if you're interested. Okay, but the triangle, the triangle looked like this. Okay, the terminus triangle, it's Friday, August the 11th, 1989. And this is what is 23 years after the murder of Sherry Bates, which occurred when Michael O'Hare was 23 years old. So it's the idea of two 23s, okay? He commits the first murder. It's the point of life is in the Z340 solution. Life is death, okay? He will create two 23-year sequences. He murders Sherry Bates when he's 23 years old. He was born in 1943. She is murdered in 1966. He will commit the terminus event in 1989 when he is 46 years old. Hence, the two victims in Vallejo, David Faraday and Darlene Ferrin, having the same initials, 4-6. Okay, that's all part of the general general theory. And please do not post questions about the numbers unless it's a very short question, because I will be delving more deeply into some of this later on. But the components of the terminus triangle in Greater Boston would have been the MIT Tower, which was at 12 degrees, BM12, which was in Chinatown, Neeland and I-93, which was 22 degrees, and the Liberty Mutual building, which was at 146 degrees. Okay, so the reason that the Zodiacs leave a watch stopped at 12:22, 10 feet from Sherry Bates's body, is to evoke these two numbers, 12:22. The watch was stopped at 12:22. Also, the angle of the California-Nevada border evokes a clock time of 12:22. That's the reason that they abducted and murdered Donna Lass. Okay, the reason that the Zodiac killer gets into the front seat of Paul Stine's cab is to evoke this number. If you look at go to Robert Graysmith's book, you will note that there were scratches on the left hand on Paul Stine's left hand. There were scratches left, which has not been made very much of. Paul Stine had, if you look at the pictures of I have to erase this stuff, because if you have I guess other people have had dry erase boards have discovered this, which is, if you have a dry erase board and you don't immediately erase what's on the dry erase board, the marks become permanent. So this is a dry erase board that I had. This is probably like 10 or 15 years old. And it still has marks here, because when I didn't completely erase it when I used it. And what ends up happening is the marks become permanent and you can't get them off. So anyway, what the Zodiac killer did was, when he gets into the front seat of the cab, he chops off most of the back of Paul Stine's shirt, so that he can then send it with his letters. But the fact is, he would have had, as has been pointed out by other people, he would have had a massive amount of shirt left to cut swatches off. How many swatches did he actually send? He sent 3. Why didn't he send a swatch with every shirt that he had, with every letter that he wrote? Because he could have done that easily, okay? And he chose not to do it. After I forget which, I think the Halloween card is a shirt swatch. And the October 13th letter has a shirt swatch. I forget which the third one is. You can write that in the comments below. I forgot to bring. Let me just stay where you are for a second. I'm gonna go get the Timex. Okay, this is a digital Timex. It's not the Timexes in 1969 would have been analog. When I worked for the U.S. Postal Service, I was a clerk in 1974, and we had this guy Charlie who was like the grumpiest human being you've ever met in your life. Okay, and you come in, you'd say, "Hey, good evening, Charlie. How you doing?" And he'd say, "What's good about it?" So one day Charlie walks in and he's all smiles. And you're saying, "What the hell happened to Charlie?" What? And I said, "What are you so happy about?" And he holds up his watch. He has a new watch. This is like mid 1974, and he holds up the watch, and he says, "Look at this. It's digital." All the watches before that were analog, and people don't believe this when I tell them this, but if you bought a digital watch in 1974 when they first came out, it cost $300. Okay, which I mean, that's a decent amount of money now. In 1974, you can do a conversion online. That is an absolute ton of money. You couldn't buy a car for that much. A car in 74, I bought a car in 76 for a new car for like 4,500. So you couldn't have bought a car, but you could have bought like a refrigerator that would still be working, because the refrigerators that they made back in 74 were really good, and they would probably still be operational today. There are a lot of things he could have done with that $300, but Charlie buys a digital watch, and 6 months later, they were selling them for, Lord knows what, like maybe like $10, something like that. And the ones that they had did more. And it's just like, if I just had I just switched carriers on my iPhone, and I had to go through the thing where I changed the SIM card, and I had to take the case off my iPhone. And I have to get a case because I drop my iPhone all the time, and I'm down in my basement all the time. If I drop my iPhone down on it, and if it's in my living room, it lands on a rug. But if it's down in the basement, it lands on a hard surface, and the iPhone wouldn't last very long. So I get this whatever they call it, the unicorn case. And these are once you put this on your phone, it's virtually impossible to get the iPhone back out of the case. Okay. That's how tough they are. It's like trying to get into Fort Knox. So what I had to do is, they give you like these instructions where you use a coin to get into one of the corners. No one has been able to do that except the people who demonstrated on the company people who demonstrated on YouTube. What I had to do was get a pair of needle nose pliers and yank the thing out, and eventually, well, in fairly short order, with a pair of needle nose pliers, you can actually get through one of these things. But as I said, it's not. It was hard. But anyway. If I didn't do that, I couldn't change the SIM card inside the iPhone. Okay, but this is more computing power than they had on the moon missions. Okay, it's a lot more computing. It's not close. And same thing with the digital watches. This is a much more sophisticated watch than anything they had in 1974. And the watch that was left by Sherry intentionally, left by Sherry Bates's body in 1966 was originally stopped at 12:22. If you look at that watch on the Riverside photo back at headquarters, it appears to say 12:23. I don't know where people get 12:24. The watch appears to say 12:23. I'm assuming that was because of handling of the watch. It changed the time from 12:22 to 12:23. Gareth Penn, who I believe was one of the conspirators, says in Time 17 that the watch was stopped at 12:22, which is why I believe that. It also matches the clock time in for the California-Nevada border, or it matches the fudged clock time for that. So the point I'm trying to make here is, if you read the, if you I wonder if I can, maybe I can get the. Let's see what Robert Graysmith actually says, so that we can see if I can read this thing. This is the murder. Okay, this is the back of my. Okay. Let's see if the jagged star-shaped tear. Consider the. How had the slayer gone to the theater district? Okay. Let me see if I have an autopsy report will contain spinal before the blood and grimer. Oh, here it is. Okay. It says. Oh, okay. It's page 91 of the hardcover edition. I have the original first edition, which I bought myself, and it's because I was already following the Zodiac case before Robert Graysmith's book came out, and my editor, years later, of my first novel about the case was Richard Marek, who it's his imprint on the St. Martin's Press edition of the Graysmith book, and so Richard Marek was my editor, and Richard Marek's the guy who said that. He said, "You're an extremely good writer, but I don't think you're a novelist." Okay, so far he's been right about that. But anyway, page 91 of the hardcover edition says, Toschi had noticed two long dark marks on Stine's left hand. Perhaps he had thrown up his hand to protect himself from the gun blast. Well, I doubt that seriously, because I think his head, if he had realized that he was about to get shot in the head, he would have been moving his head a lot more. And I don't think what he did with his left hand, and I don't think he would be doing one of these. I mean, the shot was fired in front and above his right ear. So I don't think you stick your, if you're trying to stop something, you do it with your right hand, and you would move your upper body, correct? So I should do more preparation for these things. Anyway. There were, as Robert Graysmith says, and let me get his exact wording here. Toschi had noticed two long dark marks on Stine's left hand. What was happening? Here's what happened. Paul Stine apparently had a metal watch on his left hand, okay? And when after he was shot, the Zodiac killer got into the front seat. He cut off the back of his shirt, but that was done to cover up what he was actually trying to do, which is he removed Paul Stine's metal banded watch, okay? This caused the two long dark marks on Paul Stine's left hand, okay? And the Zodiac killer, I wish I had a metal banded watch, but and I just have this. So the Zodiac killer pulls the um, the metal banded watch off Paul Stine's left hand. Because he does that, and because Paul Stine is already dead, the blood's not moving around. It leaves these two dark marks on his hand. The Zodiac killer then straps a black banded Timex, just like the one in Riverside. And by the way, just like the one that was on David Faraday's wrist. So we don't know that there wasn't some wristwatch changing on Lake Herman Road as well. Okay. But anyway, there is evidence that something was going on with Paul Stine's left hand. And it doesn't make sense that his reaction would have been to go like this. He would have done like this or moved around or what have you. So what's with the left hand? If you look at pictures of Paul Stine's dead body, what you will notice is that the watch isn't strapped down here. It's not, you or I, if we're looking at a watch, we will look at, it'll be down where our wrist is. On Paul Stine's left arm, the watch is more like here. It's like it's almost like halfway up the forearm. So I think there was some rapidity involved in putting the watch on his. Whoever put the watch on Paul Stine's arm, he was under duress. I mean, he was in a somewhat stressful situation. And that's what happened. My belief is that the watch left in Presidio Heights was intended to complete the triangle, the terminus triangle. It would the sequence of the Timexes, and the word Timex not only converts to the area code for Boston. I will demonstrate that later on, but it also mostly contains the idea of time and a timepiece. The idea is that the black banded Timex, I believe, if it hasn't been tampered with, authorities can look at the black banded Timex that was found on Paul, or if it was given to his family and put in a drawer somewhere, or put in a box somewhere, it's been there all these years. The black banded Timex will be found to be stopped at a time of 1:46. Okay. Now you may come back and say, well, wouldn't that have been noticed at the crime scene? Maybe, but maybe not. I mean, if you have first of all, the killer cutting off the back of his shirt. You had maybe people just assumed that the watch had stopped earlier in the day. You had the issue of his wallet having been taken, and something else that people don't talk about, which is cab drivers in San Francisco would have been issued badges back in 1969. They had badges just like police have. Like at least fire captains have, like U.S. postal inspectors. If I ever challenged somebody who was inside a postal facility, and it was a postal inspector, he could pull out his badge and just show me the badge. Taxi drivers were also issued badges in San Francisco, and that was not found with Paul Stine's body. So we know that whoever killed Paul Stine took his wallet, took the remnants of the shirt, and also took his taxi driver's badge. So perhaps more than anything else, that the taxi driver's badge would ascertain that the person, if it's found in a security box somewhere in a bank, that would be a kind of a red flag that hey, this one was owned by a taxi driver. Anyway, the idea of getting into the front seat of the cab was to strap a black banded Timex onto the body of the victim. They didn't do that in Riverside because it was a more logical conclusion that they would leave the watch 10 feet from the body, and then people would conclude, oh, she pulled the watch off while she was struggling with her killer. Um, in Presidio Heights, uh, they didn't expect to have a problem with that. They could actually strap, and maybe, as I said, maybe with David Faraday as well, they could actually strap the wristwatch on the wrist of the victim. Okay, so anyway, that that was the reason for doing that, and don't know. Okay, my phone just went off. Sorry. Anyway, okay, so we're at Washington and Cherry, and now the killer starts up Cherry Street. Is there anything I haven't talked about here? The He goes up. He goes up. Oh, okay. Fingerprints. There has been this recent story that Lindsay Robbins actually went out to the cab. This has been put forward by his son. I don't. His son. I've had another Zodiac researcher tell me. Okay, and I don't want to name that researcher. He knows who he is. That Lindsay Robbins' son is not the most credible person. Just in case somebody gets sued, it'll be me, and it won't be the other researcher. But Lindsay Robbins' son has said that his dad told him to keep quiet about this for like 2 years after his death, or until his grandma passed away, or something like that, and said that he is actually the one who left the fingerprints on the Paul Stine cab. Okay, this is not true. Okay, but it's kind of like the situation in Riverside with the hoaxer, the guy who wrote the 2016 letter and sent it to Riverside. Okay, that guy didn't come forward. Okay, he wrote an anonymous letter to Riverside PD, and they were able to trace it through the magic of genetic genealogy. Okay, the first question you have to ask is, why would somebody who is writing a hoax letter, the only thing that had been received in Riverside, presumably from a killer, was a typewritten letter, carbon copies of the typewritten letter? Why would a hoax writer send three handwritten loose leaf notes to Riverside PD, to the Riverside Enterprise, and to Joseph Bates? That hadn't been done before. Joseph Bates hadn't received a letter before. Why would someone who is hoaxing, same idea as in Lake Berryessa, if you're hoaxing something, you try to copy whatever the person is that you're sending the hoax letter. Why would you send something that was like completely original? It doesn't make any sense. Okay. the other problem with, well, there are two problems with the Riverside hoax. The first problem is that somehow on April 30th, 1967, when the hoaxer originally mailed the three loose leaf letters, somehow he knew that the case was going to be associated with the serial killer called the Zodiac in San Francisco. And the term Zodiac did not appear anywhere until August of 1969, which was the first time the letter writer said, "This is the Zodiac speaking." Okay, so how did the teenager know enough to sign two of the three letters with what looks like a letter Z? Okay, it's again, it it sort of evokes the whole idea of the Edwin Baird short story, Sign Z, where the killer, and the story was written and published in 1921, and the killer in the story calls up the newspaper and says, "This is Z speaking." Okay, so maybe I just have all kinds of wacky theories here, but I'm assuming that the Zodiac killers saw that short story and decided to copy it. That was part of the idea, and they had copied other things. They had copied the Death Wheel from comic books. They had copied the Smidgens cartoon on the punched hole card. Okay, and they had copied the crimes. They had copied the Texarkana Moonlight Killer. They had copied the killer of Domingo and Edwards. I don't believe the Zodiac killed Domingo and Edwards, but he did copy what that killer did in terms of having the victims tied up. So I don't know. I don't understand how the teenager in 1967 knows that the serial killer who will eventually be associated with this murder had and called the Zodiac, had a name that starts with the letter Z, but he signs two of the letters with what looks like the letter Z. Okay, perhaps more convincing than that, though, is the fact that all three letters were double posted. Okay, now I realize that I'm dealing with people who didn't work for the U.S. Postal Service for 37 years like I did. Okay, I'm just going by my own experience here. For every letter that I saw during my career that was that had too much postage on it, I'm guessing that there were at least 1,000, maybe 10,000, maybe 100,000 letters that didn't have any postage on it. Okay, people are not in the habit of putting too much postage on their letters. I can tell you that from experience dealing with letters. I was the mailman at Carnegie Mellon University for 16 years. If you got mail there from 1993 through until 2009, your mail went through these. Okay, I handled everything that pretty much everything. I was off some days, but pretty much everything that arrived at Carnegie Mellon, I handled. Okay, people don't over post their letters. Okay, it just doesn't. They're infinitely more not infinitely, but much more likely to underpost their letters than to overpost the letters. And yet, all three of the loose leaf letters are double posted. All three of them are, and they're double posted exactly the way the letters in the Bay Area are double posted. Okay, therefore, I believe that the loose leaf letters were sent by the Zodiacs, okay, and not by the teenager, okay. But I have no idea what Riverside PD believes, okay. But anyway, as far as Lindsay Robbins goes, this whole idea that Lindsay would have gone out to would have left his house and gone out to the cab. That's what the idea is. Lindsay was, according to his son, left his house, walked over to the cab, saw that the cab driver was dead or appeared to be dead, and what did he do? Did he reach in? The driver door of Paul Stine's cab was caved in. If you look at pictures of the cab that night, there had apparently been an accident, and there was this big dent in the driver door of the cab. Now the question is, did that allow for that cab door to be open? Well, I've seen the passenger door of the cab open. I have never seen a photo that shows the driver door open. So I tend to believe that the driver door, whenever the crash took place, maybe it was on the previous shift, that dented the driver door, that it then possibly rendered the driver door unable to be open. Okay, so what did Lindsay Robbins do? Did he? And I'm assuming he didn't open the door. So does this mean that Lindsay Robbins ran over to the cab, looked in the driver window, saw, Paul Stine's dead body, reached in, grabbed his dead body, tried to pull it up? Does this make any sense? I don't care what the configuration of Paul Stine's body was. I don't care if he was upside down, right side up, what have you. It would have taken considerable strength to wield that body by thrusting yourself through the driver door and grabbing it. The other question is, if he's doing that, how does he leave two fingers on the 2 fingers in blood on the separator between the front and the rear door? Now, I'm sure that there are Zodiac hobbyists out there that can come up with some crazy cartoonish scheme that gets the movement of the bodies around so that somehow Lindsay Robbins is holding on to the door separator and grabbing the body. And why he would do that in the first place, I haven't figured out, because they had called the police and they know the police are going to be there any second. Do you really want to be seen by the cops fooling around with a crime scene? Okay. Cops could pull up any second now. Is that your first move? And that isn't what Lindsay Robbins said he did. Lindsay Robbins said that when the killer left the cab, that he watched him go up Cherry Street. Well, you can do one of two things. You can either go over to the cab and do whatever he supposedly did with his body, whatever his son came up with. Or you can be at the corner of Washington and Cherry, looking up Cherry Street and watching the killer, which sounds logical to me, watching the killer make his way up Cherry Street and eventually disappear around the corner. You can do one of those two things. You can't do both of them. And the reason for that is the car wasn't flush with the intersection. The car was back. It was back behind where the fire hydrant is. If you look at pictures of the scene without even having the taxi cab, but if you look at the taxi cab pictures of the scene, the cab is here. Let's using your side of the screen, and the intersection is over here. The intersection was several feet from where the front of the cab was, okay? So Lindsay Robbins couldn't have done both those things. He either watched the killer recede, or he did whatever his son says he did at the cab. I don't think he went anywhere near the cab, and that's what Armand Pellicetti said. Logically, if Lindsay Robbins left his house to watch the killer leave, which again makes perfect sense, he would have walked out toward the front of his door and walked over on the same side of the street to the corner and looked up Cherry Street and tried to make out where the Zodiac killer was, or where the killer was, because they didn't know it was the Zodiac at that time, and just followed him, going up the path. He wouldn't have gone anywhere near the cab. And when Armand Pellicetti arrives at the scene and he gets out, he says that by the time he got there, that the teenagers were about halfway towards where the cab was. In other words, they were still more or less, they had just left their side of the street. And he kind of ushered them back to the front of their house. And then he turned around and walked toward the cab. And when he did that, he saw the bloody fingerprints on the outside of the driver door. Okay, so I don't believe that the fingerprints that were left on the cab are Lindsay Robbins. I believe they were the killers. That is what SFPD believed. If you follow the Soren Korsgaard talked about getting information from Dave Toschi that Pelicetti told them immediately that there were fingerprints on the driver's side of the cab, that they then protected made sure nobody touched that side of the cab, and that Toschi actually drove behind the cab as they took it back to the garage to make absolutely sure that fingerprints could be taken from the cab without any accidental touching of that surface. Okay, so I tend to believe, just based on what happens in normal circumstances and stances, and remember, this is a circumstantial reconstruction. It assumes that normal events are happening. Now, if you go to a Zodiac Killer message board, then you have cows flying backwards upside down. It's like that scene in Who Framed Roger Rabbit where Bob Hoskins goes through the tunnel and he comes out in Toontown and all sorts of weird things are happening. That's what happens on Zodiac Killer message boards. That I'm trying to avoid that here in my own videos. So, it's nice to get these hoaxers, the 2016 hoaxer, and now Lindsay Robbins' son, thrusting themselves into the case. Wouldn't Lindsay Robbins have told the police at some point? Wouldn't the police have, if they suspected that Lindsay Robbins was anywhere near the cab, wouldn't they have taken Lindsay Robbins' fingerprints? Maybe they did that anyway. Okay, I believe that the fingerprints. The other thing is, when Riverside sent their memo to the Napa Sheriff's Office, and the fingerprint comparison was made presumably by the FBI lab way back in 1969. The memo came out October 20th, 1969. The fingerprint comparison was pending. That means that SFPD believed very strongly, and Riverside believed when they found out that the fingerprints were mutually exclusive. Clearly, they believed that the fingerprints left on the cab were Zodiac Killer prints. So SFPD believes it. Riverside PD believes it. I believe it. Even Mike Butterfield believes that. Okay, so he's getting a lot of PR. He's getting a lot of publicity in these videos. Anyway, I go with the facts. I don't try to get even with people or the single most important thing to me is the actual evidence. Okay, that's more important than anything. It's more important that you get it right. Okay, so we have the killer leaving the cab, going up Jackson Street. I'm not going to talk at length about the incident on Jackson Street. I think it is clear what happened. Richard Grinnell gets a lot of good publicity on Zodiac Killer message boards and videos. I'm not a fan of his research. I was originally one of his biggest supporters back in 2016, 2017, and I have moved away from that. However, we do have this thing called the stop clock syndrome, which is even a stopped clock is right twice a day. Richard Grinnell came up with this idea, which I agree with, which is that the Donald Fuke and Eric Selms did talk to the Zodiac Killer. Okay, and the reason for that is Donald Fuke says on one of the videos that about the case, that they proceeded all the way to Arguello Boulevard. This has been pointed out by Grinnell, and he is absolutely right. If you're responding to an APB and you're on Jackson Street, you make the left on Cherry Street before you continue down Arguello. You pull off on the Cherry. There's no reason to drive to Arguello because your killer may still be You're proceeding to the crime scene and then maybe fanning out from there, okay? But he didn't have any information of where the killer could have gone down Washington Street, as far as he knew. All he had was the original APB, okay? So the movement of the police is consistent with the Donald Fook having spoken with the killer. Okay, we have three witnesses who say that Donald Fook spoke to the killer. We have Armin Pellicetti, who says that Fook told him he spoke to the killer. We have the Zodiac killer, who says that they did, and that he misdirected them and said, "Yeah, there was a man waving a gun. And he went up that way." And we have Eric Zelms's wife. Okay, now you can come back and say, "Well, Eric Zelms's wife says that Zelms told her that they did talk to the killer." If that's hearsay, then instead of it being 3-1, we can say it's 2.5-1. Okay, but there's no doubt in my mind that Richard Grinnell is right in this particular instance, and and I had to change my mind from that because it didn't seem to me that the Zodiac killer would have said anything to the police. If they had asked him something, he would have said, "No, I didn't see anything," and continued on his way. That's logical. That's an example of sometimes you get tripped up on these circumstantial reconstructions where something that does seem logical turns out not to have happened, or something else happened that is a little bit of a surprise. What I've tried to harp on in these videos is that taking the position that this were Cherry Bates's gastrointestinal syndrome is the reason why her food wasn't digested, and all these things. Lake Herman Road, you need like you need to be able to explain away like 10 different things that happen that don't make any sense. Okay, but coming up with these weird explanations for why things happened. What I try to do is to give multiple examples of things that don't make sense, and that backs up my circumstantial interpretation of what actually happened. In the case of Donald Fook, you also have the problem that Donald Fook didn't say anything that was made public until he wrote his scratch, and that was done on November 12th. Why is that? Why is the timing of the scratch significant? It's significant because the Zodiac killer's letter of November 9th, postmarked November 9th, would have been received by the police by November 12th, would have been received by the newspapers. And SFPD would have been asked, "Hey, did your guys run into the Zodiac killer and let him go?" And what makes sense to me is that SFPD called Donald Fook in, and probably called Eric Zelms in with him, and said words to the effect of, "Did you guys actually run into this guy as he was leaving?" And when they found out that they had, SFPD said something to the effect of, "Well, don't tell anybody tell them that you drove past the guy, but don't tell them that you actually talked to the guy. Because if you do that, we're never going to hear the end of it. Don't tell them that you stopped the car, talked to the Zodiac killer, and then let him continue on his way." Okay, so which is funny because the whatever it was, the mistake with the description of the killer as a black male adult apparently did not embarrass SFPD at all. Okay, just in case it was, well, maybe they just assume that every killer or everybody who holds up a cab is black. I don't know. But that doesn't seem to have embarrassed SFPD. The idea that two of their patrolmen would have let the Zodiac killer get away, they weren't interested in that story getting out. Okay, so Donald Fook, being the good soldier that he was, took that secret to the grave with him. However, as I said, I agreed with Richard Grinnell probably for the last time in history when he says that, see, I'm not biased, when he says that the movements of the police suggest strongly, and Fuchs' scratch and everything else suggests very strongly. And Fuchs' description. Fuchs is able to describe the guy right down to the shoes he had on. If I'm driving past people going, 25, 30 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour, yeah, I'm sure he was a trained observer of people's attire, but I don't think that I could accurately describe somebody that I saw on a dark night when my thoughts would have been, how soon can I get to this place where apparently a cabbie was shot? Okay, that would concern me. I'd be thinking about that. I wouldn't be doing an inventory of what the guy, what some guy who looked to belong to the neighborhood was wearing. Okay, but I don't know. Apparently, it makes sense to some people. Anyway, I think I've given my viewers enough to chew on. The next, this is Wednesday. The Ned DeHaan video featuring me will come out on Friday. So I would like to put out, if possible, another video either tomorrow or maybe early Friday, which will cover the Zodiac project itself and just talk about. I've done it with this video, but more, maybe a little bit more elaborately, but in this case using printouts and not my artwork, where I'm talking about what the purpose of the Zodiac project was, who the Zodiacs were, why they were doing what they did. And because, I mean, if I knew nothing about the Zodiac killer and I was watching these videos, I would say, why would people do this? I mean, I don't understand it. So I'm going to try to answer those questions. I greatly appreciate. I've had a lot of very thoughtful comments in my comment sections. I appreciate people watching these videos. I hope you found them entertaining. And as I said, I will be on Ned's channel, Ned DeHaan's channel, on Friday. And I will probably put up another video between now and Friday. This is 10:27 a.m. on Friday. Just a little bit over an hour. I thought it was more than that. But I will be. I hope to put up a more general video about the Zodiac project between now, which is Wednesday morning, and Friday morning, maybe tomorrow. I know, we'll see. We'll see how long it takes me to do the printouts. Anyway, that should do it. I appreciate people watching the video. I appreciate yeah, I can't even tell what that is. Oh, it's almost 2 hours. Okay. I appreciate people. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate people watching the videos. I will continue with more general information in my next videos. This pretty much. I may talk about some other crimes that I believe the Zodiacs committed. But this is, at the very least, concludes the section that deals primarily with the canonical crimes, and starting with the Riverside murder, and then doing the 4 canonical crimes. And I hope to keep up a schedule similar to this, because one of the things I've noticed is that the more videos you put out, the more people go to your channel, and it seems to drive traffic to what you're doing. So I will try to keep up a steady pattern of maybe higher quality videos. This is like your bargain basement video, but as I said, I do appreciate people watching the video, and I appreciate the comments. If you have any comments or questions about any of this, put them in the comments section below. And as I said, I hope to be back within a day or two about the Zodiac project itself. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks.